Everyone in the entertainment industry knew that my girlfriend was famous for her dedication. To fully immerse herself in a role, she had to personally experience everything to deliver the most authentic reaction. Because of this, she spent an entire afternoon French kissing a male actor, and as if that wasn't enough, she even wanted to go further to better get into character. When I stopped her, she had the audacity to curse at me, calling me a coward, saying I was just insecure. She accused me of being jealous, deliberately holding her back, preventing her from improving her acting skills. She even demanded that I get out of the house I bought for us. But what she didn't know was that every single role she had ever gotten was because I fought for her behind the scenes. All the investors backing her projects, they were all my people. I was devastated, as if my heart had been pierced by a blade. I had originally planned to propose to Willow at the wrap-up banquet next week, to publicly reveal my identity, to use my influence to land her a few more major roles, and push her to the top as an A-list actress. Everything I did was for her. But now, it was clear, I had only been fooling myself. With that realization, I grabbed the ring box and threw it into the trash. Then, I made a call to my closest friend. The very next day, David, the investor behind Entertainment Company, announced a total blacklist on Willow. Chapter 1. George, if you still want to inherit the family fortune, then you'll marry the Sue family's daughter. On the other end of the phone, my father's voice carried the same warning I had heard countless times over the past 8 years. I replied, "Fine, I agree to the marriage." This time, I didn't hesitate. My voice was calm and unwavering. My father was momentarily stunned, as if he couldn't believe what he had just heard. He asked, "Are you serious? What about that girl you've been protecting for the past 8 years? I'm breaking up with her." I said, "I'll take care of it." "Good. I'm glad you've finally come to your senses. Come back to the capital as soon as possible. We'll hold the wedding in a week." After hanging up, I leaned against the private lounge's doorframe, my expression dark and unreadable. Just 5 minutes ago, I had personally overheard Willow's conversation. She had laughed lightly, her voice carrying a hint of tipsy honesty. "To be honest, I'm getting a little sick of George. 8 years. It's been far too long. Just seeing him now makes me nauseous." Her friends immediately chimed in. "Exactly, your career is taking off, and he's only holding you back. You should find a time to break up with him. Isn't Makoto pursuing you? He's a rising superstar." After all, at the door, it felt like my heart had been struck with a hammer, the pain so sharp that I could barely stand. Willow had been my love for 8 years, etched deeply into my soul. We met in high school. Back then, I had forgotten to do my homework, and Willow had taken the blame for me. Watching her get scolded by the teacher, tears welling up in her clear, delicate eyes, my heart wavered for the first time. From that moment, we grew closer, and our feelings blossomed. We stayed together through high school, through university, through everything. As the heir of a billionaire family in a city, I had given up everything. I refused my family's arranged marriage, rejected a $1 trillion inheritance, just so I could build a future with Willow. She wanted a home, so I spent all my savings to buy her one. She wanted to enter the entertainment industry, so I used every resource at my disposal to help her. But as Willow climbed higher and higher, she became more and more impatient with me. 2 months ago, she took the lead role in a drama and got caught in a scandal with the male lead, Makoto. Yet, she never made any effort to clarify it. The cruelest irony, that drama was a project I secured for her. My thoughts scattered. The cold realization burned into me like a blade, piercing every nerve. I had planned to propose to Willow at the wrap-up banquet next week, to publicly reveal my identity, to leverage my power to land her even more opportunities, to make her the top actress in the industry. Everything I did was for her. But now, none of it mattered anymore. I clenched my fingers, then reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Opening the booking app, I purchased a plane ticket, one way, back to a city. Chapter 2. I took a deep breath, composed myself, and slowly pushed open the door to the private lounge. Tonight was a gathering for Willow's drama crew. Originally, I had just come to quietly watch over her, but instead, I stumbled upon the truth. Still, no matter what, I intended to end things with dignity. As I stepped in, Willow acted as if she didn't even see me. She continued chatting with her friends about the latest trending male celebrities. Moments later, Makoto arrived. The second he walked in, Willow immediately got up and hooked her arm around his, saying, "Makoto, come sit with us. Let me introduce you to some of my industry friends." Seeing this, I chuckled to myself in the corner, because all of these connections, they were ones I had secretly arranged for her. Makoto, as a popular rising star, quickly blended in, laughing and joking with the others. Someone suggested playing a game to liven things up. The dice started rolling, and in just the first round, both Makoto and Willow lost. One of the guests smirked and joked, Well, since you both lost, Why don't you reenact a scene from your drama and share a romantic toast? Yeah, I didn't get enough of the chemistry in the show. Do it again for us. Willow's face turned a light shade of red. She hesitated. Here, in front of everyone, that wouldn't be appropriate. She cast a playful glance at Makoto, pretending to be shy. Makoto grinned, coaxing her. Willow, we finally got a chance to relax and hang out. Let's not kill the mood. And just like that, the two of them intimately crossed arms and finished their drink together, prompting a round of cheers and applause from the crowd. Then, Makoto turned to me in the corner, feigning sudden realization. Oh no, I totally forgot George was here. My bad. Man, let me toast to you. No hard feelings. All right. He filled a glass and handed it to me. I frowned and said, I told you before coming here, I've been having stomach issues these past few days. I can't drink. Makoto sighed dramatically. So you won't drink with me? Guess I don't deserve the honor. Huh? With a forced look of disappointment, he downed both glasses in one go. Willow immediately reached out to stop him, concern lacing her voice. Makoto, stop drinking so much. You just had a glass. Then, she turned to me, her expression darkening. What's your problem? Did you come here just to ruin the night? The woman I had loved for 8 years, now standing up for another man. My chest felt like it had been buried in ice, the frost creeping into every part of my being. At that moment, I realized there was no point in even breaking up anymore. What difference would it make? Willow had already lost interest in me, so I simply said, you guys enjoy. I'm leaving. I stood up, unwilling to stay a second longer. Willow's face twisted in frustration. George, I was just joking around with Makoto. Do you really have to make such a big deal out of it? Stop being so petty. Just come back and apologize to Makoto, and we'll be fine. She even put on the same sulky expression she always used when she wanted me to coax her. But this time, I simply walked out the door and shut it behind me. Chapter 3. Half an hour later, I was back home. I immediately began packing my things, gathering everything that had any connection to Willow. The music box I gave her for her birthday, the photo album from our anniversary. As I held the stack of old photographs, memories flashed through my mind. The girl who once held flowers in her hands, smiling sweetly at me, had once said, when I become a big star, I'll tell the whole world that you, George, are the love of my life. But now, 8 years had passed, and the person she once was, no longer existed. The pain had run its course, leaving only a dull numbness behind. I hesitated for only a moment before heading downstairs, setting the photos ablaze in a small fire. Not long after, Willow stormed in, clearly furious, ready to confront me. But when she saw the flames consuming our past, she froze. She asked in disbelief, what are you doing? Aren't those our photos? I replied calmly, they were dirty, so I threw them away. The firelight flickered, reflecting the cold indifference on my face. Willow rushed forward, trying to salvage the half-burnt photos, but the heat forced her to pull back. She shrieked, are you insane? If they were dirty, you could have just wiped them clean. Her voice trembled, tinged with regret. I watched the scene unfold, yet felt nothing. Just hours ago, she had sided with another man to humiliate me, and now, she wanted to act heartbroken. What kind of reaction would she have if she knew I was leaving for good? Her hands, now red from the burns, trembled slightly. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Gritting her teeth, she turned to me and snapped. You burned 8 years of our memories, all because you're jealous over something that happened tonight. I never realized you were such a petty, small-minded person. I shrugged indifferently. They're just pictures. We can always take more next time. Next time. Willow suddenly stiffened, as if something clicked in her mind. She narrowed her eyes at me. You're not doing all this just to pressure me into marrying you, are you? She scoffed, folding her arms. George, let's be real, you haven't achieved anything. Our future? That's on me now. Stop making things difficult. All right, forget about marriage. I'll think about it after I win Best Actress. With that, she turned on her heel and stormed into the building. I watched her go, my eyes devoid of emotion. Marriage? Would I even consider marrying a woman who cheated on me? As the elevator doors closed behind her, I spoke softly. Don't bother thinking about it. I'm not planning to marry you anymore. Then, without another glance, I packed up the rest of her things and tossed them into the trash. The next morning, the air was still crisp and cold. By the time I woke up, Willow had already been picked up by Makoto for her drama shoot. I took a taxi to the film set and found David, the investor overseeing the project. David had been my childhood friend. While I had left the industry, he had inherited his father's entertainment empire and was now one of the most influential figures in showbiz. The moment he saw me, he grinned. Well, if it isn't George. He closed his office door and handed me a cup of tea. Relax. Everything is set. At the wrap-up ceremony this weekend, I'll personally bring you up for the proposal. And afterward, We'll lock in a deal to help your fiancée win Best Actress. He was just about to pull out a contract when I shook my head. No need, I said. I'm heading back to the capital. Chapter 4. The moment the words left my mouth, David nearly dropped his contract. His eyes widened in shock. Did I hear that right? The great young Master Wang is heading back to the capital. Then what about your fiancée? It's over. I smiled faintly and added, the Su family has been wanting to arrange a marriage with me for a long time. David raised a brow. So you finally came to your senses. I've been telling you for years, the Su family's eldest daughter is the perfect match for you. Not only is she stunning, but she's been in love with you for years. His expression gradually turned serious as he asked, tell me the truth. What the hell happened? I calmly stubbed out my cigarette and told him everything. When I finished, David slammed his hand against the table. His jaw clenched in fury. That woman, how could she do this to you? Does she even know how much you've sacrificed for her? I replied, it doesn't matter. It's over. David patted my shoulder, his tone firm. Don't worry, George. With my status in this industry, I know exactly what to do. I nodded. All right. See you next week in a city. As I stepped out of his office, I was ready to leave the set. But just as I passed by the filming area, I heard a familiar voice. Makoto. Willow. For this scene to be as realistic as possible, let's just do a real kiss. The director frowned. We can use camera angles to fake it. There's no need for an actual kiss. He tried to dissuade them, but Willow didn't hesitate for a second. It's fine. I agree. A real kiss is more natural. After all, it's for the sake of art. Her cheeks flushed as she wrapped her arms around Makoto's neck. The next moment, they kissed deeply. Makoto's hands shamelessly roamed across her back, and she made no effort to stop him. The director quickly captured the scene while the crew erupted into cheers, egging them on. I felt a sharp, suffocating chill in my chest, like icy wind flooding my lungs. But after a few moments, the sensation faded, like nothing had happened at all. Makoto suddenly glanced in my direction and immediately put on a show of surprise. Oh, George, I didn't see you there. His expression twisted into mock regret. I swear, it wasn't intentional. You know how it is, just a kissing scene. He smirked. There will be plenty more in the future, so I hope you don't mind. I let out a short laugh and said, completely indifferent. Doesn't matter, as long as you're both happy. Willow stiffened slightly, as if feeling guilty. She clearly didn't want me lingering around, watching any more than I already had. She stepped forward, her voice cold. George, should you really be here? You're an outsider. Stop interrupting our work. I chuckled. Right, I'm just an outsider. I was just about to leave. I turned to go, but for some reason, Willow suddenly hesitated. A flicker of guilt crossed her face, and she almost reached out to stop me. But before she could, Makoto grabbed her wrist, holding her back. Just then, a commotion stirred in the distance. An investor, visibly panicked, came rushing over. Why, young Master Wang, what an honor. We weren't expecting you to personally oversee the production. Chapter 5. The moment the investor spoke, both Makoto and Willow visibly stiffened. Makoto spun around, scrutinizing me, while Willow stared in utter disbelief. I had no intention of revealing my identity, so I merely cast a glance at the director. The investor quickly caught on and corrected himself. My apologies. I must have mistaken you for someone else. Willow let out a relieved sigh and scoffed coldly. I knew it. The Wang family of a city is one of the most elite families in the country. How could we ever be connected to them? Makoto, seeing her relax, regained his composure and smirked. Well, not necessarily. Actually, I happen to have a way to contact young Master Wang. I could even arrange for him to attend the wrap-up banquet with you. Willow, who knows? He might even help you win Best Actress. He was bluffing. Makoto had no real connections to any big names. He had merely overheard David's phone call about young Master Wang attending the wrap-up banquet and securing Willow the Best Actress award. He had no idea who Wang Xiaoya actually was. He just wanted to act like he had influence and use it to manipulate Willow. Unaware of the truth, Willow smiled gracefully and said, "Thank you, Makoto. I'll go fix my makeup. Be back soon." Of course, the moment Willow walked backstage, Makoto dropped his act entirely. He strutted up to me, wearing a smug grin. "You saw that, right?" he sneered. "I've got money, looks, and connections. If you know what's good for you, you should step aside now." I remained unfazed. "Do whatever you want. I have no interest in a woman who's already tainted. If you think she's a treasure, go ahead and chase her." Makoto's smirk faltered for a second before his competitive streak flared. "Is it really so hard to admit you're a loser? You're just pretending to be indifferent. You know how much I make per project. A few million. Have you ever even seen that much money in your life?" His eyes gleamed with arrogance. "Now, let me show you who Willow truly cares about." With that, he suddenly shoved over a nearby prop stand, causing a cascade of swords to crash down upon us. Sharp metal clattered against the floor. cutting into our hands and legs. Blood instantly seeped from our wounds. "Makoto, are you okay?" Willow's panicked voice rang out as she sprinted toward him, her face full of worry and distress. "What happened? I'll take you to the hospital right now." Makoto sighed dramatically. "It's my fault. I must have provoked George. I shouldn't have said anything." He cast a pitiful glance at me, feigning hesitation. Willow's expression darkened with rage as she turned to me. "What the hell is wrong with you? Did you come here just to bully Makoto? You'll pay for this." Without waiting for my response, she hurriedly helped Makoto into a car and rushed him to the hospital. Meanwhile, my own hands and legs were slashed even worse than his. Blood dripped onto the floor, the wounds far more severe than Makoto's superficial scratches. The investor, now fully aware of the situation, quickly called David. Within moments, David and several others rushed over to get me bandaged and sent to the hospital. After they made sure I was settled, they left to handle other matters. Not long after, my mother called. "George, I've told you before, women like that aren't worth it. Look at yourself now." Hurt because of her, I was silent for a long moment before finally speaking. "Mom, I was too young and naive before, but now I understand everything." She sounded pleased. "That's my boy. So when are you coming home? Your father is thrilled. He's already set aside 1 billion yuan for you as pocket money. The Su family has also sent over a generous dowry, a luxury estate at Shanghai lawn and a globally limited edition supercar." I replied. "All right, I'll be back in 4 days. We'll throw the grandest wedding a city has ever seen." Just then, a cold voice cut through the room. "What wedding?" I turned my head. Standing in the doorway, Willow stared at me, her face pale with shock and disbelief. Chapter 6. I hung up the phone, my expression turning cold. "It's nothing. It has nothing to do with you." Willow frowned. "Nothing to do with me? Weren't you just talking about marrying me?" Something about the situation unsettled her, but then she remembered what had happened today and felt another surge of anger. "You've already turned my life upside down, and you still want to talk about a wedding? Do you have any idea how much I had to say to Makoto just to convince him not to call the police? Look how forgiving he is." I responded indifferently. You're right." She scowled. "Why are you being so passive-aggressive?" Her disgust was evident. "I'm at the most critical stage of my career right now." Makoto went out of his way to introduce me to major industry figures and even lined up a few projects for me. 4 days from now, at the wrap-up banquet, young Master Wang from a city will personally attend. If I can make connections with him, winning Best Actress will be a sure thing. Hearing this, I suddenly laughed, because that so-called young Master Wang was me. Willow glared at me. "What's so funny?" Disappointment filled her voice as she said, "George, you need to remember that you have nothing right now. If you still want a future with me, stop interfering with my life, go apologize to Makoto, and this will all be over." I replied. "I can't walk." I gestured toward my injured leg and said, "Let him call the cops." I'd actually love to hear him apologize to me. Willow froze. She had always been used to me giving in, used to me immediately apologizing whenever she got angry, but now I was acting like an entirely different person. She gritted her teeth. "You're completely unreasonable." Frustration and rage filled her. She was losing control over me, and she could feel it. "Are you even a man? You can't even take responsibility for your actions. How am I supposed to trust you with my future?" She paused, then shot me one last disappointed look before turning on her heel and slamming the door shut. I glanced down at the wounds on my hands. I couldn't feel anything anymore. The heart that once burned with passion had turned to ashes, but none of it mattered. Soon, I would be walking away from her forever, to chase a new future. 3 days passed, and the night fell once more. Willow had stayed at the hospital the entire time, personally tending to Makoto's every need, feeding him, taking care of him, pampering him. Makoto even made a social media post about it, a picture of Willow feeding him soup, his face full of affection. Caption, "With you by my side, even soup tastes warmer." The post went viral, quickly trending on the hot search. Fans flooded the comments. "Too sweet. I'm declaring this the best couple of the year. This is making me want to fall in love. So heartwarming. That guy who knocked over the props should be arrested and forced to apologize on his knees." Makoto and Willow actively engaged with the comments, painting Makoto as the bigger person for not pressing charges. And throughout it all, Willow never once clarified the truth. I scrolled through the posts, feeling nothing. After a while, I left a comment, "Wishing you both a long and happy life together." Not even half an hour later, Willow burst into my apartment, demanding, "George, what do you mean by that comment? I told you, my thing with Makoto is just for publicity. Why are you getting jealous?" Just then, Makoto stepped in as well, putting on an innocent face. "I'm sorry, George. I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand." Willow waved a hand dismissively. "It's fine. This isn't your fault." She turned back to me and said, Makoto is staying over tonight. We need to prepare for tomorrow's wrap-up banquet. If you cause trouble again, I will not forgive you. I looked at her calmly and said, you don't need to go to the wrap-up banquet, because young Master Wang won't be attending. Then, in an even voice, I stated the truth. I am young Master Wang of a city. Everything in your career has been because of me. Chapter 7. I was going to reveal my identity at the wrap-up banquet tomorrow and help you in Best Actress. But now, I've changed my mind, because you don't deserve it. Willow froze. George is young Master Wang. That's impossible. If he had that kind of background, why would he have spent all these years living such a humble life with her? As she processed my words, her anger only deepened. George, you've really learned how to lie just to hold me back. Huh? She sneered. Just because your last name is Wang, you think you can pretend to be young Master Wang? The investor already said he mistook you for someone else, and yet you're still living in this delusion instead of improving yourself. Are you even a man? You're sleeping on the couch tonight. Reflect on your mistakes. With that, she stomped off to the bathroom, leaving me and Makoto alone in the living room. The moment Willow was gone, Makoto dropped his act entirely, smirking in arrogance. George, you pathetic loser. Lying just to get Willow back. How desperate can you get? You pretended not to care, but now you're making a fool of yourself competing with me. Let me make sure you lose completely. He reached into his bag and pulled out a bundle of fresh flowers, shoving them directly into my face. I instantly felt my body seize up. I was allergic to pollen. The moment the overwhelming scent invaded my senses, my entire body convulsed. My skin flared up in hives. My throat tightened, and I could barely breathe. Take it away, I gasped. I smacked the flowers onto the floor and stumbled toward the cabinet, reaching for my medication. My hands trembled violently as red welts spread across my skin. Medicine, help me get my medicine. Willow emerged from the bathroom, frowning. George, what are you doing now? Her eyes landed on the mess of flowers on the floor, and she immediately snapped. Without a care, she shoved me aside and rushed to pick up the flowers. My already weakened body lost its balance, and my head slammed into the sharp corner of the wall. Blood immediately gushed down my forehead, my vision blurring. But Willow didn't even glance at me. She only cradled the flowers in her hands, her voice full of heartbreak. Do you know how long it took Makoto to pick these flowers? How could you do this to him? Makoto feigned guilt. I'm sorry. I didn't know Mr. Wang hated me so much. I just wanted to give him a gift. Since you two are the real couple, I'm the one who came between you. His voice trembled as if he were genuinely distressed. Then he turned to me and asked with fake concern, Mr. Wang, are you okay? Should I carry you to the hospital? Leave him. Willow gritted her teeth and shot me a look of disgust. You're really acting like you're dying over a little allergy attack. Let's see how long you can keep this up. Makoto, let's go. She grabbed his hand and dragged him into the bedroom, slamming the door shut. I struggled on the floor, my entire body convulsing, the sensation of suffocation creeping closer. With the last bit of strength I had left, I finally reached my medication, popping a few pills into my mouth. The pain was unbearable. My vision darkened, and then, everything faded away. When I woke up, my head throbbed, my limbs stiff and aching. But before I could even sit up properly, I heard it. Muffled moans from inside the bedroom. Gentler. Makoto, why are you worried? He hasn't moved for so long. He's definitely asleep by now. The sounds of their entangled bodies filled the air. I lay there, listening, emotionless, heartless, numb. At the break of dawn, I could finally move again. Slowly, I pushed myself off the ground, every muscle in my body aching, but I felt nothing. There was no rage, no sorrow, just a void where my emotions used to be. I had already wasted 8 years of my life. Not another second. I took a shower, cleaned up, and grabbed my pre-packed suitcase. Then, with one last glance at the bedroom door, I turned the handle and walked out. As I stepped into the cold morning air, the fog swallowed my silhouette, fading me into the distance. Chapter 8. The next morning, Willow opened the door, waiting for George to come and apologize like he used to. However, the living room was empty, except for a dried pool of blood and scattered pills. A sudden wave of worry washed over her. After all, she only wanted to anger George, not truly hurt him. Sensing her hesitation, Makoto immediately reminded her, he'll handle it himself. The wrap party is about to start. Willow, let's go. All right. Despite the discomfort in her heart, Willow didn't want to let anything delay her future. 1 hour later, inside a well-known restaurant in Sea City, the film crew was celebrating their wrap party. Willow, Makoto, this project has gained so much attention, and it's all thanks to you too. Everyone was singing praises for Makoto. Seeing the atmosphere grow livelier, he took out a carefully prepared necklace. Makoto turned to Willow and said, Willow, let's make it official. From now on, I'll be by your side as we climb to the top together. In an instant, the crowd erupted into cheers. Be together, be together. Willow's face flushed red. She originally intended to accept the necklace, but her fingers suddenly brushed against the pendant resting on her collarbone. It was the token of love she and George had bought when they first got together. Back then, they were naive and sincere, swearing to love each other until the end of time. She had once promised that unless they severed ties completely, she would never take off this necklace. At that thought, her heart pounded violently. Feeling guilty, she said, "Let's wait until the party is over. Makoto, thank you for being so good to me." Makoto's expression darkened slightly at her rejection, but determined to win her over completely, he changed tactics. He smirked and declared, "By the way, I managed to invite young Master Wang. He should be arriving any minute now." Several actresses who had been working with Willow squealed excitedly. "Don't hesitate anymore, Willow. Just break up with that useless boyfriend of yours already. Haven't you been saying you're tired of him? If you get together with Makoto, you'll be living the high life." Willow hesitated. "I need to think about it." She forced a smile but couldn't shake off the growing unease. She and Makoto were certainly close, but now, at such a crucial moment, something inside her resisted. After all, she had been with George for 8 years. If she truly agreed to this, how was she supposed to face him? At that moment, a waiter approached her. "Miss Liu, a gentleman came by this morning and asked me to give you this." Willow's heart clenched as she saw the rusted necklace in his hand. She grabbed it and asked anxiously, "George was here this morning. What did he say?" The waiter replied, "He didn't say anything. He only asked us to cancel a reserved proposal event." So, George had really planned to propose today, but she had repeatedly hurt him these past few days, driving him to complete despair. Had he overheard last night's conversation too? Realizing the gravity of the situation, Willow wanted to rush out and find him immediately, but thinking about the legendary young Master Wang's imminent arrival, she forced herself to stay. She needed to rise to the top, for herself and her family. It would be fine. Everything would be fine. George was just sulking out of jealousy. As long as she met young Master Wang and successfully became a top actress, their future would be set. Willow kept reassuring herself. She would reject Makoto after the party and apologize properly to George. Just as her mind was spinning with thoughts, a figure appeared. David entered through the main doors, his face dark as thunder. Makoto's face lit up instantly. He rushed forward, eager to flatter him. "David, what brings you here? I heard young Master Wang was coming today, but I haven't seen him yet." David responded coldly. "Young Master Wang won't be coming. He is very unhappy right now." His words sent a shockwave through the crowd. People murmured among themselves. "What's going on? Did someone offend young Master Wang? Why is he angry?" Makoto's heart started pounding. A chilling realization flashed through his mind, George's words from last night. Cold sweat broke out on his back, but then he dismissed the thought. That was impossible. Fuming, he demanded, "Who upset young Master Wang? David, tell us, and we'll deal with them." David let out a cold laugh. "All right, then." His eyes landed on Willow. "You see, young Master Wang was once young and foolish. He loved a woman for 8 years. He worked tirelessly behind the scenes, only for that woman to grow tired of him and scheme to kick him aside for her new lover. Isn't that right, Willow?" Chapter 9. The moment those words left David's mouth, the entire room fell into stunned silence. Willow trembled violently, every hair on her body standing on end. The powerful figure behind the scenes was actually her boyfriend, George. Makoto's face twisted in shock. "That's impossible, David. You must have the wrong person. He's just a broke loser." Panic overtook him as he staggered forward, desperately trying to refute it. But before he could get any closer, David struck him hard across the face. A sharp smack echoed through the hall. David roared, "Watch your damn mouth. George has been my brother since we were kids. He is the eldest son of the Wang family in a city. My patience is nowhere near as good as his. Everything you've done to him, I'll return 1,000-fold." Makoto went pale as a ghost, his legs trembling beneath him. He could barely stay upright. The Wang family of a city, weren't they the elite empire worth trillions? The kind of family that could crush him with a mere flick of a finger. What had he done? It was over, completely over. Beside him, Willow nearly collapsed to the floor. So George had been telling the truth all along. He was the heir to a powerful family, and for years, he had silently supported her from the shadows. Her success had nothing to do with Makoto at all. Her voice quivered as she clenched the necklace so tightly that her nails nearly broke skin. "David, where is George now? I need to find him. I need to apologize. I was wrong. Get lost, you shameless whore." David shoved her away in disgust, his voice laced with fury. "George gave up his family's fortune for you. He supported you without complaint, and yet you had the audacity to betray him. You're not worthy of seeing him. Prepare to face the consequences." David's harsh words cut through her like a knife, leaving her paralyzed with regret. So George had sacrificed everything for her, even his place in his family, just to be with her. And now, after everything she had done, Had she finally pushed him away for good? Willow muttered under her breath, "George. I have to find George." Without another thought, she spun on her heel and sprinted into the rain, heading straight for home. Her mind repeated the same desperate mantra, "It's fine. Everything will be fine. I'm Willow." How could he possibly abandon someone he's loved for 8 years? As long as she sincerely apologized, George would forgive her, because no one in this world loved her more than he did. She burst through the familiar doorway, her voice trembling. "George, are you here?" "I'm back." Silence. Everything inside was empty. George was gone. Every trace of him had vanished, as if he had never existed. Willow forced a laugh, scanning the apartment. "Come on, don't hide. I came back to apologize. Just listen to me, okay?" She wandered through the place, opening doors and searching every corner, but there was nothing, not even a goodbye letter. Frantically, she pulled out her phone and dialed his number, only to find that every line of communication had been blocked. George was gone, completely. A suffocating wave of despair crashed over her, sending her knees buckling as the room spun around her. Memories of the past few days flashed in her mind. George throwing things away, burning old photographs, confessing his true identity. He had been preparing to leave all along, and she hadn't even noticed. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she spotted a dark stain on the floor. Blood. A significant amount, enough that someone must have been lying there for a long time. Her breath caught in her throat. How long had George been unconscious here? Had he almost died? A sharp, stabbing pain erupted in her chest as tears streamed uncontrollably down her face. When George had been falsely accused, when he was injured, when he was at death's door, how hopeless must he have felt? Even just imagining it was enough to break her. With shaking legs, she forced herself to stand, whispering through her sobs, "George. I will find you, please don't leave me." Chapter 10. With that thought, Willow dashed downstairs and hailed a taxi. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Tears blurred her vision as she frantically searched for any news about the Wong family of a city on her phone. Trillions in real estate, wealth that could rival nations, a top-tier aristocratic family. None of it mattered to her. She kept scrolling, desperately looking for their exact address, then quickly booked the earliest flight available. "I'm sorry, George. I'm so sorry. Wait for me. I'm coming to find you." A breaking news notification popped up. Reliable sources confirm the Wong family's sole heir is set to marry Miss Su in a business alliance. Bang. Her phone slipped from her grasp, crashing onto the ground. The screen cracked at the corner. Willow stood there, dazed, shaking her head in disbelief. "No, that's impossible. George loves me. 8 years together, there's no way that could be replaced by some arranged marriage." She hurriedly picked up her phone, urging the driver to speed up. The Wong family's residence might be hidden, but if she got on the earliest flight, she could still track him down before the wedding. "Driver, faster, please, hurry." Meanwhile, at a city's airport, I stepped out of the terminal, inhaling the crisp air deeply. The airport had been cleared in advance. "Welcome home, young Master Wong." A line of bodyguards in black suits bowed in unison. My mother walked over and took my arm, her face filled with worry. She sighed. "George, the wind in a city is strong. Why are you dressed so lightly? You've suffered a lot these past few years, haven't you? Your father and I have been worried sick. When we said we were cutting ties, we were just angry. Don't take it to heart." I nodded. "I know, Mom." Taking a deep breath, I added, "From now on, I'll listen to you both." Sensing the heavy atmosphere, one of the bodyguards draped a jacket over my shoulders. A few of my childhood friends stepped up, trying to lighten the mood. "Men, your rebellious phase lasted a little too long," one of them joked. "Good thing you finally came around. We have to celebrate properly, no leaving until we're drunk." I chuckled. "Of course, let's make up for lost time." At that moment, a petite figure suddenly flung herself into my arms. With teary eyes, she cried out, "George, you finally came back." I froze for a second and looked down at the familiar, delicate face. It was Anna, my childhood fiancée. Years had passed, and she had grown into a stunning young woman. If the Su family hadn't kept such a tight leash on her, refusing to let her enter the entertainment industry, her natural beauty would have put every actress to shame. The thought of the entertainment world made Willow's face briefly flicker in my mind. For that woman, I had fled this engagement for years, breaking my parents' and Anna's hearts. Swallowing the bitterness, I pushed the memories away and teased Anna instead. "You're still a crybaby after all these years." "Huh," she pouted. "I am not." Wiping away her tears, she tilted her head playfully and said, "I was just happy for Uncle and Auntie. That's all. Young Master Wong has finally returned. I was starting to think you'd keep avoiding me forever, not wanting to worry my parents." I casually rubbed my forehead, but Anna's sharp eyes caught the wound. "Ah, your forehead." The people around us immediately closed in, all staring at my injury. My mother, Horrified, hurriedly called the family doctor. One of my friends even demanded to know who hurt me, vowing revenge. Their concern was genuine. I shook my head, my gaze calm and indifferent. It's nothing. It's all in the past, and they've already gotten what they deserve. The most important thing now is my wedding with Anna. There's no need to waste time on small fish. Anna's eyes sparkled as she gazed at me. Our families had arranged the wedding for next weekend. Over the next few days, Anna took me around the city to unwind, showing me places we used to visit as kids. As we reminisced, she giggled, her eyes crinkling with joy. George, you remember all of this just to tease me, don't you? I smiled, just about to respond, when suddenly, a disheveled figure burst out from a side street. George, she grabbed onto my arm tightly, her tears falling like rain. Choking on her sobs, she cried out, George, I finally found you. Why did you leave me? Chapter 11. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and exhaustion was written all over her face. She looked utterly pitiful. I hesitated for a moment before recognizing the disheveled, haggard woman in front of me, Willow. Ever since she had risen to fame in the entertainment industry, she was always impeccably made up, living a glamorous life. But now, everything had reversed. I met her desperate gaze with cold indifference and forcefully pulled my arm away from her grip. Sorry, we have nothing to do with each other anymore. With that, she stumbled backward, falling hard onto the ground. Her once prized face scraped against the gravel, leaving a thin, bloody cut. She looked up at me with those pleading, sorrowful eyes, hoping to break my resolve. George, how can you be so heartless? Do our 8 years together mean nothing to you? The way she questioned me, like I was the one who betrayed our relationship, was almost laughable. I let out a mocking chuckle. 8 years? Funny, you didn't seem to care much about them either. I took Anna's hand without hesitation, smiling openly. Let me introduce you, this is my fiancée, Anna. Willow's face turned ghostly pale, her eyes fixed on our intertwined hands. No way. This isn't real. It can't be real. They're just in a business marriage. George would never abandon me. She screamed, her once angelic voice now raw and broken. I don't believe it. Anna tilted her head, looking at her with feigned innocence. For a second, I thought a beggar had wandered into the villa district. My mistake. She batted her lashes playfully, her voice light and casual. Then she tugged on my sleeve, leaning close. George, we still need to go pick out my wedding dress. I nodded. Let's go. Without sparing Willow another glance, I took my beautiful fiancé's hand and walked away. Behind me, a choked voice called out, George, but I never looked back. I left her standing there, hopelessly whispering my name into the empty air. At the bridal boutique, the manager had been waiting and greeted us with a deep bow. This is a private custom design from our top designer. The luxurious gown trailed elegantly along the floor. Its design had been in the works for over a year, specifically for this marriage alliance. Anna stepped out of the fitting room in the pristine white dress, looking breathtaking. Blushing slightly, she lowered her voice. Does it look good? I studied her intently, then smiled. Good isn't nearly enough to describe it. You look absolutely stunning. Anna averted her gaze, cheeks burning at the compliment. She suddenly reached out, covering my eyes with her hands. You're not allowed to look anymore. She giggled. Wait until the wedding day. Her playful, spoiled tone was sweet and full of affection. Outside the boutique's high-end glass windows, Willow stood frozen, her eyes swollen from crying. She could only watch as the men who had loved her for 8 years smiled beside another woman, helping her try on wedding dresses. What about me? What am I supposed to do now? Chapter 12. Willow's reflection in the glass revealed a woman who was nothing like the dazzling star she once was. Dark circles under her eyes, disheveled hair, a vacant, broken expression. She was no longer the glamorous actress adored by the public, and compared to the radiant and elegant Anna inside the bridal boutique, she was utterly unrecognizable. Slowly, she sank to the ground, covering her face in despair. Then, her fingers brushed against something in her pocket, her old necklace. Her eyes lit up. The necklace. Yes, the necklace. Their token of love. Surely, this would bring back his memories of what they once shared. Clutching the rusty pendant, Willow felt a spark of hope reignite. She rushed back to her hotel, applied flawless makeup, and dressed in her best outfit. Then, every day, she waited at the gates of the Wang family estate, begging the guards to pass messages to George. She even sent over countless gifts, stacking them in the security room. The security team, caught between duty and fear of offending the Wang family, finally approached me. Young Master Wang, there's a woman at the gate, crying and begging to see you. I was reviewing the wedding plans when I heard this, my brows furrowed in annoyance. Not interested. Get rid of her. What was the point of a love that came too late? The guard nodded and left, but soon, he was back again. Young Master Wang, she's kneeling at the gate, making a scene. We can't get her to leave. Before I could respond, Anna volunteered. George, let me handle it. A woman who refused to let go. Anna had more than enough ways to deal with that. A large burlap sack full of gifts was unceremoniously dumped outside the estate gates. The loud thud startled Willow. Anna stood nearby, arms crossed, her gaze icy. She spoke calmly. You hurt George for 8 years. Do you think sending a pile of useless junk will fix that? We're getting married. If you want to send a gift, at least make it something decent. Tears streamed down Willow's face as she desperately tore open the sack, rummaging through its contents. Choking on her sobs, she muttered, he said he only loved me. He promised he'd never marry another woman. Anna casually dangled something in her fingers, a rusted necklace. Looking for this, it was the same one Willow had begged the guards to deliver, only for George to toss it aside like trash. Willow shot up, trying to snatch it from Anna, but her knees, bruised and swollen from kneeling too long, gave out beneath her. She collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. The pain numbed her legs, leaving her helpless on the ground. If this had been before, George would have rushed to her side, tending to her wounds, coaxing her gently. If this had been before, George would never have allowed her to suffer like this. Willow's tear-filled eyes burned with hatred as she glared at Anna. In her mind, Anna was the reason George had changed. Anna smiled sweetly, her delicate face composed. You can have this back. She blinked innocently, then, right before Willow's eyes, she pocketed the necklace instead. Willow lunged for it, but Anna easily sidestepped her. Anna smirked. I'll give it to you, on one condition. She tossed the necklace to the ground. You take it, and you leave. For good. Willow snatched it up like a treasure, tears spilling onto the tarnished metal. She shook her head desperately. I'm not leaving. I have to see George. Anna's patience finally ran out. George doesn't want to see you, she snapped. Do you not understand? You cheated on him. You betrayed 8 years of his devotion. He hates you. I hate you. Her words were like knives, cutting into Willow's last shreds of dignity. The Sue family had a vast network of connections. Learning about Willow's past betrayals had been effortless. With a wave of Anna's hand, the security team lifted Willow off the ground and carried her away. Anna made sure she didn't return empty-handed. She even bought Willow a plane ticket back. With a bright, charming smile, Anna called out, "There's a whole mess waiting for you to clean up back home. You should get going." She didn't even need to lift a finger. The entertainment industry was ruthless. Willow's downfall was already set in motion. Chapter 13. The moment Willow stepped off the plane, her phone exploded with incoming calls. As soon as she answered, her agent's furious voice blasted through the speaker. Willow, what the hell are you doing? Get your ass back to the set immediately. There was a time when her agent treated her like a golden goose, speaking to her with reverence. Now, that respect was gone, replaced with impatience, insults, and curses. Willow bit her lip, unable to utter a single word in her defense. The moment she arrived at the film set, the director stormed up to her, his face red with fury. You shameless idiot. You had young Master Wong as your boyfriend, and you cheated on him. Because of this mess, David pulled all his investment. The entire production is ruined, completely finished. Nearby, the other actors glared at her, their resentment burning through their stares. Most of them were just here to make a living. Now, after nearly a year of filming, all their work was wasted. But weren't they the same ones who encouraged Willow and Makoto's closeness before? Now, they were looking for someone to blame. Bang. The director, still fuming, slammed a termination contract onto the ground. Sign the damn thing and get lost. Otherwise, we all go down with you. Willow's hands trembled as she picked up the contract. Tears blurred her vision as she silently signed away her role. The moment she stepped outside, she ran straight into her agent, Lisa. Lisa was seething, grabbing Willow's arm with a bruising grip. You're unbelievable. You've completely ruined yourself. Have you even checked the trending topics? Willow, still dazed, shook her head and pulled out her phone. Trending topic number 1. Entertainment investor David officially blacklists Willow and Makoto. Blacklisted. Years of effort, everything she had worked so hard for, was about to be erased by a single word. Her fingers trembled as she tapped the headline. David had personally exposed her scandal with Makoto. Shocking. Famous actress Willow betrayed her hidden billionaire first love, cheated, and got blacklisted. The internet had exploded. Wow. This couple's fans kept screaming about how sweet they were. Turns out it was a cheater and a homewrecker. Does anyone know who this billionaire ex-boyfriend is? Seriously, who was Willow's first love? The fact that David himself handled this means they must be powerful. I heard Willow only got good resources because of her rich ex, and she cheated on him. I study chemistry. This is sodium carbonate, you know. Just like being basic. Willow's hands trembled, her vision spinning. The insults weren't wrong. They were absolutely right. 4 years. George had given her everything. She had been blind, throwing it all away. She had ruined herself. Barely aware of her surroundings, Willow climbed into a taxi, numbly heading back to her apartment to lay low. One by one, the brands she worked with released termination notices. The breach of contract fees were sky high, but she had some savings, enough to scrape by. Makoto, however, had been taking on high-end endorsements, drowning in luxury deals. His penalty fees were astronomical. He would be ruined. Willow entered her apartment in a daze. The once lively space felt suffocatingly empty. Everywhere she looked, traces of her life with George remained. The furniture, the decorations, everything was still there, but he was gone. She picked up a shirt that had fallen on the floor, one of his old ones, stained with blood. Her knees buckled. She clutched the fabric to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably. Bang, bang, bang. Loud, urgent knocks echoed through the apartment. She stiffened. Everyone in the industry had cut ties with her. Who would come looking for her now? For a fleeting moment, her desperate heart hoped maybe George came back to see her. But deep down, she knew that was impossible. Wiping her tears, she hesitantly called out, "Who is it?" A hushed, nervous voice answered, "It's me. Open up." The voice was deliberately low, almost sneaky. Makoto. Chapter 14. The moment Willow heard that voice, rage flared in her chest. "This is all your fault," she snapped. "How dare you still come here?" From outside, Makoto kept pounding on the door, his voice trembling with desperation. "Please, Willow, let me in. They're going to kill me." A flicker of hatred passed through her eyes before she finally yanked the door open. Makoto was barely recognizable. He was wrapped tightly in layers of clothing, a mask covering most of his face, clearly terrified of being recognized. The moment the door opened, he scrambled inside like a rat fleeing from the streets. Panting, he collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. "You've heard, haven't you?" he muttered, his voice hollow. "All my contracts, gone. I can't pay off the billions in breach fees." His face was ashen, his mind reeling. How was I supposed to know George was the Wong family's heir? He always dressed like a damn pauper. It's over for me. "Willow, help me." He suddenly turned to her, his eyes lighting up with a twisted kind of hope. He crawled toward her, reaching out desperately. "Please, you're the only one who can save me." His voice cracked in terror. The loan sharks that the investors had sent after him weren't ordinary debt collectors. They were merciless. They had already broken one of his legs. His entire thigh was swollen, blood seeping through his pants from a poorly treated fracture. Every movement sent a jolt of unbearable pain through his body, leaving him drenched in cold sweat. But Willow, she felt nothing but disgust. She wrenched her arm away, shoving him back violently. "Don't touch me. Get away from me." Her hatred for him burned fiercely. It was because of him that she had been so blind. It was because of him that she had repeatedly hurt George. Makoto stared at her, his eyes filled with panic. "Don't be like this. Willow, you loved me. How can you be so heartless?" Willow clenched her teeth, fury consuming her. Slap. A loud smack rang through the room. Her hand throbbed from the impact, but she didn't care. "Who the hell loved you?" she spat. "It's because of you that I lost George." Her lips trembled as silent tears spilled down her cheeks. Then, without hesitation, she slapped herself across the face, even harder than before. Makoto flinched, his phone suddenly buzzing violently on the floor. A message popped up on the screen. He glanced at it, his face immediately drained of color. His hands shook violently as he pressed the speakerphone button. A guttural, furious voice growled from the other end. "Your phone's got GPS, doesn't it? Think I can't track you down? If you don't pay up, I'll break every last bone in your body." Makoto visibly shrank, his entire body trembling. His leg throbbed unbearably, a painful reminder of what these people were capable of. With a strangled cry, he hurled his phone across the room, smashing it to pieces. Then, he turned to Willow, gripping her hands in a desperate plea. "Help me, please. Willow, George still loves you. He won't make things hard for you. Just beg him to spare me. I'll do anything. I can be his servant. I can crawl on my knees if I have to." Tears streamed down his face as he slapped himself repeatedly, his expression twisted in fear. Willow glared at him, her lips curling in disgust, then kneeled down and apologized to George, on video. She had a plan. If she recorded this, maybe, she could use it to beg George for forgiveness. She needed to prove to him that she didn't care about Makoto. She only cared about him. Makoto hesitated for only a second before he immediately dropped to his knees. Bang. The sound of his forehead hitting the floor was sharp, desperate. Through ragged sobs, he wailed. "I'm sorry, young Master Wong. It was all my fault. I should never have seduced your girlfriend. I should never have tried to fight you. I was wrong. I'm a worthless piece of trash." His hands trembled as he smacked himself across the face over and over, tears and snot dripping down his chin. Every second of his humiliation, his complete and utter defeat, was captured by Willow's phone. Chapter 15. Makoto, the coward, begged for mercy, kowtowing in submission, wiping the sweat off his forehead. Still shaken, he set his sights on this apartment. "Willow, you can help me," he pleaded. "This place is new, right? Just sell it for now and help me out." His greedy eyes roamed the exquisitely furnished apartment as he mumbled, "Once I get through this, I'll make money and pay you back." Makoto made a solemn promise, but all he got in return was a fierce glare from Willow. This apartment held precious memories of her and George. It was impossible for her to sell it. Seeing her unmoved, Makoto cursed her in his heart but dared not say it out loud. This bitch, acting all sentimental now. As if she wasn't rotten too. Takes two to tango. Gritting his teeth, he hissed, "If you don't sell the apartment, how are you supposed to help me? Those loan sharks will kill me." Willow ignored him. She carefully saved the video recording like it was a priceless treasure, then picked up Makoto's phone, which he had dropped in fear earlier. Makoto shuddered, his heart pounding with terror as he watched her every move. He was terrified, his voice hoarse as he shouted, "Willow, you said you'd help me." Willow glared at him with nothing but hatred in her eyes, completely disregarding whatever they once had. She spoke coldly, "Help you? Would George ever forgive me? Did you think about the consequences when you beat him, humiliated him?" Seeing her bloodshot eyes and frenzied state, Makoto panicked, scrambling to explain. "Willow, calm down, just listen to me." Willow gripped the phone tightly, her jaw clenched, her face full of hatred. "He won't come back. So you might as well die." She held up Makoto's phone and dialed the loan sharks directly. Her voice was ice cold. "You're looking for Makoto, right? He's here with me. I won't be paying his debt." Makoto scrambled to his feet, trying to snatch the phone, but Willow shoved him hard to the ground. "Willow, you can't do this to me," he screamed from the floor. Not long after, there was a loud pounding at the apartment door. Willow, staring into Makoto's despairing eyes, shoved him out the door without hesitation. "Go to hell," she yelled. The electronic lock clicked shut. Outside, the brutal sounds of fists and kicks landing on flesh filled the air, accompanied by Makoto's agonized screams and pleas for mercy. Willow listened, unmoved. At that moment, she realized she never truly loved Makoto. He was not only cowardly but had deceived her for so long. Compared to George, he was nothing. The only reason she had ever felt anything for him was because the story had been too dramatic, and she had gotten lost in the role. The noise outside gradually faded. The loan sharks dragged Makoto away. They didn't care about anything but money. If he couldn't pay up, they had plenty of ways to deal with him. Most likely, he would end up with broken legs, severed fingers, or even sold off overseas. Silence settled over the apartment. Willow let out a deep breath and collapsed onto the floor. She tossed aside the phone, her eyes red as she pulled out two rusted necklaces. Chapter 16. They had promised, so long as the necklaces remained, they would never part. 8 years together, from first love to now. Yet he was about to marry someone else. The apartment, once filled with warmth, now felt empty and cold. Everywhere she looked, there were traces of George. Her heart clenched in pain as memories flooded back. This small apartment had been out of her budget when she first found it. She had been so disappointed, until George stepped in to negotiate. In the end, the landlord sold it to them at a lower price, supposedly in a rush to move. Looking back, there was no way she had gotten so lucky. George must have pulled some strings. Tears streamed down Willow's face as she traced their names on the property deed. They had sworn an oath in this very apartment. She could still hear the echoes of their burning promises, but he was gone. According to their vow, their names should have been side by side on a marriage certificate, in a shared household registry. Willow covered her face, letting her tears fall freely. Every piece of furniture here, they had picked out together. This was supposed to be their home, their love nest. Yet, she had betrayed him. She had thrown away 8 years of his quiet, unwavering devotion. Clutching the two necklaces close to her heart, she wept in regret. Then, she made a public apology to George online. She even attached the recording of Makoto groveling for forgiveness. Every word in her post was sincere. She poured out their history in detail, from their high school days to now, an emotional, 1,000-word confession. "As your lover, I have wronged you." The moment she hit post, it skyrocketed to the #1 trending topic. Her phone vibrated violently as floods of insults poured in. "This bitch is really putting on a show." "What? Feeling guilty now? Damn. He treated you like a queen and you still went and cheated. Why don't you record yourself slapping your own face instead? That'd be more convincing." Not like she'd actually do it, though. Her agency had already cut ties with her. No one would send PR teams to clean up her mess. She was left to drown in the filth of public opinion. Willow sat dazed on the couch, neither eating nor drinking, just clutching the necklaces and crying. Every now and then, as if remembering something, she would snatch up her phone, only to see more hate comments. There was nothing from George. Her face fell as she tossed her phone aside again. She waited. 5 hours passed, and still, there was no response. She hadn't eaten all day, and her stomach churned in unbearable pain. Curling up on the couch, she gritted her teeth and reached for the medicine cabinet. The bottle of painkillers was empty. George had always made sure she had them. Now that he was gone, no one would take care of her anymore. She curled up, shaking in pain, tears falling endlessly. Then, ding! A notification popped up on her phone. It was a business news alert. Breaking: young Master Wang of a city and Miss Sue's wedding will be held in 2 days at Panda Grand Hotel. Willow froze, then shot up, her body trembling violently. 2 days. In 2 days, the men she loved most would marry someone else. She couldn't just sit here and do nothing. George had loved her so much. She had to fight for him. Her eyes locked onto the hotel's name on the screen, her hands shaking as she booked a flight to a city. This time, she would do whatever it took to make it right, because they were meant to be. Chapter 17. I sat on the couch in the bridal boutique, quietly waiting as Anna changed into her wedding dress. For such a grand wedding between the Wang and Su families, the bride's gown had to be carefully selected. The previous dress had a minor flaw in the design, so the designer had rushed to prepare a new one. As I lowered my head to check my phone, the top trending topic was Willow's apology post. I frowned slightly and coldly blocked her private account. I even checked the option to mark the topic as uninteresting. I didn't care about Willow's attitude now, nor did I care about what the public thought. I only wanted to focus on my present life. A broken mirror could never be made whole again. I would not make the same mistake twice. From the fitting room came Anna's shy voice. "George, can you come in for a moment?" I froze, my heartbeat suddenly accelerating. Instinctively, I wanted to say it wasn't appropriate, but the words caught in my throat. After a brief pause, I steadied myself and responded. "All right, in 2 days, we would be married." What was there to be shy about? The fitting room door opened slightly, just enough for me to slip inside. I calmly stepped in and quickly closed the door behind me. Before me stood my beautiful fiancée, dressed in a pure white wedding gown. Her cheeks were flushed as she turned her face away in embarrassment. The little girl who had once run after me, calling me George brother, was about to wear this dress and become my wife. She hadn't expected me to actually come in. Her wide eyes sparkled with a mix of surprise and nervousness. You really came in," she stammered, looking up at me hesitantly. I chuckled helplessly and ruffled her hair. "Didn't you call me in for help? What are you staring at?" Anna's face turned an even deeper shade of red as she averted her gaze. "George, my zipper is stuck, can you help me?" Her voice was so soft, it was almost inaudible. I chuckled lightly and lowered my head to help her. As I carefully zipped up the dress, we were close, so close that I could feel her warm breath mingling with mine. The faint, fresh scent of her perfume filled my senses. Just as I was about to step back, she grabbed my hand. The atmosphere shifted, tinged with subtle intimacy. Through our fingertips, warmth was transmitted between us. Anna boldly held on to me, looking up with cautious anticipation. "George, we're really getting married, right? This isn't a dream, is it?" To her, this was like a dream she had waited her whole life for. She was finally going to marry the man she had loved for so many years. I saw the sincerity in her eyes, and in truth, I had always been fond of this girl. If love was measured by devotion, then Anna, my childhood sweetheart, was the one who truly fit the definition. It was only in my reckless youth that I had made the mistake of chasing the wrong person. I nodded and replied with certainty. "Yes, we are getting married." Anna's smile blossomed like a flower, her heart filling with sweet happiness. She gently touched the faint scar on my forehead, her voice full of concern. "Does this still hurt?" She knew that it was that terrible woman who had hurt me. I smiled faintly, reassuring her. "No, it doesn't. The wound had healed long ago. I had once been hurt by Willow, but now, I felt nothing at all." Anna threw her arms around me tightly, her voice filled with conviction. "I won't let Willow hurt you again or take you away from me." She vowed to herself, no one would ever hurt the men she loved again. Just 2 more days. In just 2 days, our wedding would take place under the watchful eyes of a city's elite. Knock, knock. A staff member knocked on the fitting room door. Anna had been inside for too long, and they were beginning to worry. "Miss Sue, do you need any help?" The door opened. Hand in hand, Anna and I walked out with composure. The store attendant looked at us, momentarily stunned by the intimate moment they had just interrupted. Blushing awkwardly, they stammered, Sorry, young Master Wang. I didn't mean to." The store attendant couldn't help but think. Whoever said the marriage between Wang and Sue was just a business deal clearly had no idea what they were talking about. The couple wasn't even married yet, and they were already this affectionate. Chapter 18. The plane landed in a city. Willow hailed a taxi, her heart racing as she rushed toward the Wang estate, desperate to see George one more time. But she never made it inside. The security guards stopped her at the entrance to the villa community. Recognizing her instantly, one of the guards spoke politely but firmly. "Apologies, Miss Liu, but you are not permitted to enter." Willow's eyes were swollen red from crying. but she refused to back down. Why? She choked out. I need to see George, please. I'm begging you. Just let me see him. He would want to see me. No matter how much she pleaded, cried, or even tried to force her way in, the guards remained indifferent. Miss Liu, please leave, one of them said coldly. An hour passed. Willow, exhausted and tear-streaked, realized there was no way she could break through. Then, without warning, a torrential downpour crashed down from the sky. The icy winter rain drenched her completely. She shivered violently, the cold cutting through her soaked clothes like a blade. Rainwater mixed with her tears as she continued to beg. Please, let me in, she sobbed. She had to get George's forgiveness, if not, she would never forgive herself. But the guards remained unmoved. One simply waved her away. Go home. They weren't clueless. They had seen all the news, heard all the scandals. Willow's name was already notorious, and with Miss Sue's orders in place, there was no way they'd let her through. Defeated, Willow had no choice but to retreat to her hotel. She curled up on the couch, wrapped in a towel, her entire body trembling from the cold. Her fingers, still shaking, scrolled through her phone. What now? She couldn't get into the Wang estate. If she couldn't see George, what was she supposed to do? With nowhere else to turn, she called David. The line connected, and before she could say much more than a soft, David, he immediately recognized her voice and exploded. A string of curses poured through the phone. When he was done, he spat. Don't call me again. Don't ruin my life too. Willow listened quietly, letting him say everything. Only after he finished did she speak, her voice trembling. It's about George. I have something important to say. Can we meet? She had no news of George, no way to reach him. Her only hope was through David. David had been George's childhood friend. If he agreed to help, she would have a chance. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, David sighed. Say whatever you need to say to me. Don't go bothering George. His best friend was already drowning in wedding preparations. David had time to spare, so he might as well handle this mess himself. A woman who cheated, betrayed, and still refused to let go. Disgusting. Clicking his tongue in annoyance, he crushed out his cigarette. Meet me on South Road, a city, he said. Then, he gave her the name of a cafe. Outside, the rain poured on. David called his driver. Might as well pick her up, and hopefully, end this ridiculous drama once and for all. Chapter 19. This cafe belonged to the Chen family, and David was the one who managed it most of the time. Before coming over, he had made a quick call. The cafe had already closed for the night. The place was dead silent. Thud. The sharp sound of knees hitting the floor startled the manager and barista, making them glance over. Neither of them had expected the woman to drop to her knees the moment she stepped inside. But this was a high society affair, none of their business. Both quickly averted their eyes, pretending not to see or hear anything, keeping their heads low. Willow no longer cared about dignity. Her tears had nearly run dry. The moment she saw David, she knelt on the ground without hesitation. David, please, she begged. Help me. Let me see George. At least let me watch his wedding, so I can give up. The thought of the wedding being just 2 days away made her heart ache unbearably. Even if George would never forgive her, couldn't they at least meet one last time? She sobbed wretchedly, pleading like a broken woman. Just once, let me see him, please. Boom. Outside, the storm raged on, thunder rumbling through the sky, yet even the crashing thunder couldn't drown out her desperate cries. TCH, David sneered. So all this just to watch George's wedding? You think you deserve that? Please. Willow remained kneeling, her hands pressed together as she continued to apologize and beg. I'm sorry, I've wronged George. I love him. Even if you just let me see the wedding, let me say one last word to him. I'll give up. David looked at her pathetic figure, but his heart didn't waver. The thought of what she had done with Makoto filled him with disgust. Rage burned in his chest on behalf of his best friend. His voice was filled with contempt as he spat. You're filthy. You disgust George. Do you get that? Willow clutched her face in agony, tears streaming down. Her voice was barely a whisper. I know. I know. She was dirty now. She wasn't worthy of George anymore. David smirked cruelly and pointed toward the pouring rain outside. What's the point of kneeling here? Go kneel outside. A storm like this. Kneeling outside was nothing short of suffering, but that was exactly what David wanted, to make her pay, even if only a little, for what she had done to his brother. The debt collectors who had beaten Makoto to a pulp, that had been David's doing too. He had even found evidence of Makoto's tax evasion and sent him straight to prison. And now, it was Willow's turn. David stared at her in disgust and motioned toward the door. Go wash yourself off in the rain. Maybe then I'll consider letting you see George. Willow turned to look at the torrential downpour outside. Without hesitation, she stepped into the storm. She knelt down, gritting her teeth as the icy rain drenched her completely. Her knees ached from the impact against the hard pavement, but she lowered her head, motionless. her stomach twisted in pain, her body weak from exhaustion, but she forced herself to endure. This was nothing. George had suffered far worse because of her. If kneeling in the rain meant she could see him again, then she would kneel as long as it took. She had to hold on. The rain was bone-chilling, seeping into her very core. She trembled violently but didn't dare to move. If she upset David now, he might change his mind. As if the heavens were punishing her too. The storm only grew heavier, the rain pounding against her like stones. The streets were empty, only she remained, kneeling alone in the downpour. Inside the cafe, the manager stood by the glass window, watching with a troubled expression. He sighed. David, she's going to get sick out there. He wanted to say more, but David only chuckled coldly. You know who she is. Then, he casually revealed Willow's identity. The manager's eyes widened in shock. He glanced back at Willow, his gaze turning complicated. David leaned back, smirking. Still think she's pitiful. My brother was beaten bloody because of her and that bastard Makoto. Letting her get a little wet is nothing. The manager quickly shook his head. No, this woman wasn't pitiful at all. In fact, he almost wanted to go out and slap her himself. Chapter 20. The rain poured relentlessly, heavy droplets pelting down without end. Willow knelt on the ground, her body trembling violently as she fought against the searing pain spreading through her limbs. The storm had drenched her to the bone, the biting cold seeping into every inch of her body. Every gust of wind sent another wave of shivers through her, forcing her to curl up, hugging herself tightly for warmth. She had lost track of time. How long had she been kneeling here? Her limbs were stiff, frozen, her head throbbing from the relentless exposure to the cold. Yet, she didn't dare to move. If she showed even a hint of weakness, if she angered David in any way, he might refuse to let her see George. Another blast of frigid wind hit her. Her eyelids drooped, exhaustion pulling her under like a relentless tide. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stay awake. Desperately, she dug her nails into the flesh of her arm, pressing hard until sharp pain jolted her senses. The sting helped her stay alert, just barely. She had to stay conscious. She deserved this. She had betrayed George, hurt him in ways she could never take back. A little rain was nothing in comparison. Through the downpour, she heard approaching footsteps. Lifting her head weakly, she saw David walking toward her. Her dim, lifeless eyes instantly lit up with hope. David, she croaked, voice hoarse and trembling. I can see George now, right? Her gaze was filled with desperate pleading, clinging onto the last shred of hope. David stared at her, his lips curling into a sneer. She looked absolutely pitiful, soaking wet, kneeling in the rain, shaking from the cold, but he felt no sympathy, none at all. This was nothing more than punishment. She had destroyed George's life, now it was only fair she suffered too. Watching the anticipation in her eyes, David let out a cruel chuckle. Then, in the coldest voice imaginable, he gave her the answer she dreaded. No. Willow froze, her lips parted, but no sound came out. The light in her eyes dimmed, flickering out like a dying ember. David looked down at her with pure disgust. Your heart is filthy, he spat. No matter how much you try to wash it clean, it will never be pure again. Tears spilled silently down Willow's face. She shook her head, despair taking hold as she choked out, I'm sorry. I know I was wrong. David didn't even spare her another glance. He turned away, stepping into his car under the protection of his guards, untouched by a single raindrop, leaving Willow kneeling alone in the storm, drowning in her own regret. Boom. Thunder roared overhead, lightning flashing through the sky. Willow barely noticed. Her vision blurred, blackness creeping in from the edges. Her body swayed, her lips trembling as she tried to speak, tried to apologize one last time. Sorry, George. But before she could say another word, her world went dark. She collapsed. The cafe manager, who had been watching, gasped in alarm. She passed out. In this freezing weather, after kneeling in the rain for an entire day, it was no surprise. The manager wasn't heartless enough to let her die at their doorstep. He quickly pulled out his phone and called an ambulance. Then, just as an afterthought, he sent David a message. When Willow woke up, she was in a hospital bed. Her body ached all over, her head splitting with pain. Blinking groggily, she struggled to focus. For a brief, fleeting moment, she thought she saw George standing beside her bed, her lips curled into a weak, fragile smile. Reaching out with a trembling hand, she whispered, George, I'm sorry. Tears slid down her cheeks as she pleaded for forgiveness, but no voice answered her, no warmth reached her, only silence. Her quiet sobs were the only sound in the empty hospital room. Chapter 21. With another blink, the illusion shattered. Willow was still lying alone in the empty hospital room, her head throbbing. There was no George, just cold, sterile air surrounding her. A bitter smile twisted her lips. She murmured to herself, voice hoarse and self-mocking, as if George would come see me. He probably wishes I were dead. She wasn't worthy of his concern. She wasn't worthy of his care. Yet, once upon a time, every time she got sick, that man, the one who had loved her so deeply, would always be by her side, taking care of her with unwavering patience. Tears soaked into the pillow beneath her as memories flooded back, suffocating her with their sweetness and regret. Her chest ached unbearably. She thought of that day, the day George had been sick, and she had been too busy flirting with Makoto to care. How disappointed must he have been? How heartbroken. "I'm sorry," she whispered to no one, but she knew, no matter how many times she said it, nothing could ever make up for the pain she had caused him. Her free hand clenched into a fist, pounding against her own chest. Then, as if punishing herself, she bit down hard on the back of her hand. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth, mixing with the saltiness of her tears. The pain sank deep into her heart. She deserved to die. The door suddenly swung open. A nurse entered, only to see Willow hurting herself. Alarmed, she rushed forward, pressing down on Willow's trembling arms. "Hey, what are you doing?" The nurse struggled to calm her down, finally managing to restrain her enough to prepare a new injection. But before she could administer it, Willow's cracked voice interrupted. "What time is it? How long was I unconscious?" The nurse glanced at the clock and casually replied, "You've been out for a night. It's 8 a.m. now." She thought nothing of it, until the next second. The woman on the bed completely broke down. Willow's face contorted in panic. The wedding. The wedding. George's wedding was happening soon. She had to go. She had to get there in time. George hadn't forgiven her yet. She still had a chance. She could still fix this. Frantic, she tried to climb out of bed. The nurse gasped, "What are you doing?" Willow yanked the 4 needle from her wrist without hesitation. Blood spurted from the torn wound, painting the pristine white sheets red. She cried out in pain, but she didn't stop. Ignoring the agony, she struggled to get off the bed, her weak legs unable to hold her weight. She collapsed, hitting the cold floor hard, but even then, she didn't stop. On trembling hands and knees, she kept crawling toward the door, dragging herself across the floor. A trail of blood smeared beneath her, stark and horrifying. She didn't care. She would crawl all the way if she had to. She had to see George. Outside the hospital room, David stood by the window, watching everything unfold, his brows furrowed in deep irritation. He let out a low curse under his breath. What the hell is this woman doing now? Now she was going crazy. Now she wanted to see George. David finally realized this situation was more troublesome than he had expected. Willow was completely losing her mind. If this continued, someone was going to end up dead. She was so desperate to see George. He was afraid she might do something irreversible. He sighed heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose. This was getting out of hand. He couldn't handle this alone anymore. After a long hesitation, he finally pulled out his phone and sent George a few messages. He could guess George was still busy preparing for the wedding, but this had gone too far. He typed, "George, Willow won't stop. She keeps trying to see you. She's completely lost it. I'm worried she might actually die over this. You need to decide what to do." Attached was a short video. In it, Willow could be seen struggling across the hospital floor, blood pooling beneath her, her hoarse voice calling George's name over and over again. Miserable, pathetic, and utterly broken. Chapter 22. I was fastening my bow tie when my phone vibrated a few times. As the heir of the Wang family, only my close friends and family had access to my private number. With both hands occupied, I couldn't check the notification right away. Just then, a delicate, fair hand reached into my pocket and retrieved my phone. "I got it for you," Anna said playfully. She winked at me, her bridal makeup making her already striking features even more radiant. She had just stepped out of the dressing room, the layers of her elegant wedding gown trailing behind her. For a moment, I was mesmerized. Anna respected my privacy, so she only held the phone for me without glancing at the screen. She then handed it over with a teasing remark. "Checking my husband's phone is something for after the wedding," she said, her cheeks flushing as she turned away with a soft hum. I took the phone from her and casually slipped my bow tie into her hands. "Then is tying my bow tie part of a fiancé's duties?" I asked. Anna shot me a shy glare but still lifted her head, carefully adjusting the bow tie for me. We were about to be married. Even this small moment of intimacy was enough to make her blush, her heartbeat racing. With my hands free, I finally glanced down at my phone. Seeing David's messages, my expression darkened, and my brows furrowed. I didn't care what the video was about. My first instinct was to turn off my phone. But just as I was about to close the screen, my eyes accidentally caught a glimpse of the video's contents. Blood. Willow, crawling on the hospital floor. For a second, I hesitated. It wasn't concern. It wasn't sympathy. I was simply wary, worried she would do something reckless to sabotage the wedding. David had likely sent the message because he couldn't handle the situation alone. In the few seconds that I paused, Anna finished tying my bow tie. We were standing close enough that, when she lowered her gaze, she could see the screen. She looked up at me and said, "Let her come. This needs to be settled." Her expression was composed, but her voice was steady, firm. Then, with her lips slightly parted, she softly asked the one question I couldn't refuse. "Okay." Our fingers intertwined, a reassuring warmth passing between us. As I silently nodded, Anna had already taken my phone, typing out the message herself, "Let her come." When she let go of the phone, her ears were flushed red, and she turned away, embarrassed. I didn't let her escape so easily. Holding onto her hand, I chuckled and teased, "Aren't you afraid I'll rekindle old feelings with her? It was just a joke. I would never have anything to do with Willow again. The woman I was about to marry had loved me for years, and she deserved nothing less than my full devotion." Anna huffed, pouting slightly as her cheeks turned even redder, but instead of backing down, she met my teasing with her own. "I'm not afraid," she said confidently. "That's why I want her to give up completely." There was no mistaking the jealousy in her voice. I laughed, lacing our fingers together as I mused. "Then let's see what the great Miss Sue has planned." Anna let out a soft hum, her expression full of pride. "I won't let anyone ruin our wedding." With less than an hour until the ceremony, we were both dressed and ready. The wedding cars had already arrived. My parents were waiting nearby, urging us to get into the car. My mother, graceful as always, smiled warmly as she teased, "Whatever you two need to talk about, do it in the car. It's good luck to be seated before the ceremony begins." Anna instinctively met my gaze. Then, she climbed into the wedding car first. We still had to wait for Willow to arrive. This had to be handled before she had the chance to cause a scene at the ceremony. Chapter 23. David was surprised when he saw George's reply. That woman had hurt him so deeply, yet she was still willing to meet him. Holding his phone, he walked into the hospital room. Several nurses had already restrained Willow tightly, preparing to administer a sedative. Willow called out to him, "David." The moment she saw David, her emotions finally calmed down. Her eyes were red from crying, and she pleaded, "Please, let me see George." Even if George didn't forgive her, she just wanted to apologize and make amends for her past mistakes. David felt irritated seeing her like this. He turned his gaze away in disgust and waved his hand. "He agreed to let you come." Willow's eyes widened in surprise, her voice trembling as she asked, "Really?" George was finally willing to see her again. David frowned and said impatiently, "Stop talking. Get in the car." Willow got into David's car, and they rushed to the Wong family villa, with David leading the way. She wasn't stopped by the security guards this time. Willow entered the Wong family's house alone, walking cautiously and nervously. Her mind kept racing, thinking about how she should apologize to George. Would George forgive her? Would he even be willing to listen to her? Her heart ached at the thought, and she clenched her hands so tightly that her nails dug into her palms, drawing blood, yet she didn't even feel it. She was still running a high fever, her complexion pale, with an unnatural flush on her cheeks. The dizziness and discomfort had been completely overshadowed by the overwhelming tension and anticipation. Before she knew it, she had already stepped into the Wong family's grand living room. But in the next second, a stern voice rang out, "Willow, what are you doing here?" A harsh reprimand made her look up in alarm. She was met with a square, dignified face, bearing a striking resemblance to George's. This was a face she often saw on television, attending high-class banquets and public events. Before, she had never connected this man to George. They were from completely different worlds. Willow's voice was timid. "Uncle." Beside him stood an elegant and well-maintained noblewoman. "Aunt." She knew these were undoubtedly George's parents. When George had been with her in the past, he had told her that his parents disapproved of their relationship. Willow called out carefully, wanting to say more, but before she could, Mr. Wong cut her off with an intimidating glare. "You ruined my son's life for 8 whole years, and now you want to destroy him completely. Our Wong family has already shown you mercy by not holding you accountable. If you still don't know your place." Beside him, Mrs. Wong, though looking kind, frowned deeply, her expression filled with disapproval. Thinking about how her son had been devastated by this woman, beaten to the point of bleeding, made her, as a mother, want to slap Willow herself. She warned coldly, "If you don't leave on your own, we'll call security." Willow refused to leave. She suddenly dropped to her knees. With a loud thud, her knees hit the marble floor, the impact echoing in the spacious room. The pain instantly drained even more color from her face, but she could only plead through her sobs, "Sir, ma'am, I beg you, please, just let me talk to George." Seeing her shamelessly refuse to leave, Mr. Wong burst into fury. "You're nothing but a third-rate actress. Getting involved with George was already a stroke of luck for you, yet you had the audacity to ruin his life." His breathing grew heavy with anger, his gaze sharp and merciless. He gritted his teeth and spat. "I don't even know what he ever saw in you. He turned his back on his own father just to suffer through 8 years with you. Mrs. Wang placed a calming hand on her husband's arm, trying to soothe his anger. She had no desire to waste words on the wretched woman in front of her. Quietly, she picked up her phone and called security. Moments later, the security team arrived, ready to forcibly remove Willow. Tears streamed down Willow's face, but she remained firm, kneeling stiffly on the floor, refusing to move. She pleaded, "Sir, ma'am, I've already paid the price for what I did. Can't that be enough to see him just once?" Under Mrs. Wang's order, the guard stepped forward and dragged her out. Willow sobbed as she was forcibly removed, her feet skidding against the floor. Just as she was being dragged to the front entrance of the villa, a wedding car pulled up at the door. Chapter 24. Willow instinctively looked up and, through the car window, caught sight of George. It was George. She immediately started struggling violently, desperately trying to break free from the security guards. Ignoring everything else, she lunged toward the wedding car. "George, George," she cried out, pounding on the car door, her hands turning red and swollen from the force. The car door opened. George stepped out, holding Anna's hand, his other arm wrapped around her slender waist. Standing together, they looked like the perfect couple, their sweet, intimate atmosphere leaving no room for anyone else. The sight of them struck Willow like a bolt of lightning. She stood frozen in place, staring at them, her eyes turning red. She had always believed this was nothing more than a business marriage, one without real emotions. She thought George didn't love Anna, that he was only marrying her due to pressure, but the reality before her eyes was completely different. They held hands tenderly, their bodies close, their exchanged glances filled with warmth and intimacy, just like a pair of lovers madly in love. And the truth was, they were about to step into marriage, becoming the closest people to each other. Thinking about this, Willow shook her head frantically, refusing to believe it. No. No, it couldn't be. She was the woman George loved the most. 8 years of love, there was no way it could just disappear like that. She lifted her head and met my cold, distant gaze. Tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. I looked at her indifferently and said calmly, "How long do you plan to keep making a scene?" The disdain and impatience in my tone made it clear. I saw Willow as nothing more than an annoying problem to avoid. Her heart clenched painfully at my words. She lowered her eyes, the light in them dimming. She opened her mouth, trying to defend herself. "I did everything for you. I love you. I only love you. Before she could finish, I cut her off impatiently. "Enough." I tightened my grip on Anna's hand, ready to turn and get back in the car. "There's no undoing the past. No matter what you say, it won't change anything." The wedding was starting in half an hour. I had no interest in wasting more time on people who didn't matter. Willow refused to let me go and reached out to grab my arm, only to catch nothing but air. Anna, unable to hold back anymore, sneered at her coldly. "If cheating and hurting him is your idea of love, then your love is worthless." Tears continued to stream down Willow's face. She kept muttering apologies. I'm sorry. Anna remained composed. Holding my hand tightly, she stared straight at Willow and smiled. "You can attend our wedding if you want, but you'd better behave yourself. Otherwise, I won't be so polite." "Let's go," I said, unwilling to waste another second. Seeing me about to leave, Willow refused to give up and clung to the car door. Choking on her sobs, she asked, "George, are you really going to marry her? You promised you would marry me. We made that promise 8 years ago." Her voice was hoarse from not drinking water all day, but she still shouted desperately, "I was your goddess for so many years. Can you really bear to abandon me?" The car window rolled up, blocking Willow's view. She could only hear my final, emotionless words. "A goddess, no matter how perfect, once tainted, is worth less than garbage." It was like a final death sentence for Willow. Her face turned deathly pale as she broke down completely, sobbing hysterically. The wedding car drove away. Willow ran after it, crying, but there was no way she could outrun a car. Very quickly, she was left behind. Her fingers, clawing desperately at the car window, bled as her nails cracked. Then, she collapsed heavily onto the ground. No matter how shattered she felt, all she could do was watch as the wedding car disappeared into the distance. Struggling through the pain, she forced herself to get up from the ground. Clenching her phone tightly, she suddenly remembered something and mumbled like a madwoman. The wedding hotel. She found the news notification, right there, bold and clear. It read, Panda Hotel. She had to go. Even if she had to watch George marry someone else with her own eyes, at least then, she would finally give up. Chapter 25. The commotion from earlier had already drawn my parents to the scene. They stood at the entrance, watching as Willow sat on the ground in a daze, mumbling the words Panda Hotel over and over. She looked completely deranged, lost, broken, and on the verge of madness. My father's brow furrowed tightly, his tone heavy with warning as he spoke coldly. "Willow, I'm warning you, if anything happens to this wedding, the Wang and Su families can make sure you disappear from this world. My mother, eyes filled with restrained anger, let out a long sigh. As parents, they had once indulged their son in dating this woman, and now they deeply regretted it. Willow remained silent for a long time before suddenly standing up. She wiped away her tears and solemnly bowed to them. Sir, ma'am, I won't interfere. But she had to witness the wedding with her own eyes. Only then could she finally let go of the love she had clung to for so long. Lowering her head, Willow walked out of the Wang family residence, hailed a taxi, and rushed toward the wedding venue. By the time she arrived, the wedding was about to begin. At the entrance of Panda Hotel, the area was bustling with people. Every guest was a prominent figure in a city, and in the midst of it all, stood Willow, battered, bruised, and still dressed in her hospital gown, looking completely out of place. Following Anna's prior instructions, the security guards didn't stop her from entering. However, they led her to a remote, inconspicuous corner, an isolated spot from which she could watch everything unfold. One of the guards sternly warned her. Miss Liu, this is young Master Wang and Miss Su's wedding. Please behave yourself. This seat had been specially arranged for her, a front row view to watch the men she loved walk down the aisle with Anna. Tears fell numbly from Willow's eyes, blurring her vision as she stared blankly at the ceremony. George and Anna stood facing each other, solemnly reciting their wedding vows. The audience rose from their seats, erupting into thunderous applause. Only Willow remained motionless, silently crying, looking utterly defeated and broken. She had given away the men she loved with her own hands. This was her fault. She was the one who had betrayed George's love. The officiant's voice echoed through the hall. And now, our groom may kiss his beautiful bride. May their love last forever. In the midst of warm blessings and cheers, George reached out, gently holding Anna's face. Then, he kissed her, sealing his love for the rest of his life. Everything from the past was wiped clean. No more regrets. No more hesitation. Willow watched this affectionate moment like a form of self-inflicted torture, her eyes stinging as she refused to even blink. Tears had long since soaked her face, but she didn't even realize it. She didn't even bother to wipe them away. She had never understood before just how much she loved George, and now that she had lost him completely, it felt like her heart was being ripped apart, suffocating her with unbearable pain. Chapter 26. Even so, Willow never once looked away from the newlyweds standing on the stage, because if she didn't watch now, she might never see him again. She saw everything, the way George lowered his head to kiss Anna with such tenderness, how he carefully cradled her head to keep from tiring her out, every small detail, filled with deep affection, all of it reflected in Willow's tear-filled eyes. She thought back to the past. George had once loved her with the same kind of tenderness. For 8 years, every tiny moment of his devotion was still vividly imprinted in her memory. For the first time, her fever-clouded mind seemed to clear. Willow reached up and pulled away her scarf, feeling for the 2 necklaces that hung around her neck. They were once meaningless to her. Now, she held them in her palms, cherishing them like treasures. Tears dripped onto the tarnished pendants, and she carefully wiped them away. Regret and self-blame soaked into the rusty metal, as if trying to wash away the past 8 years of neglect. The necklaces were badly corroded. After all, they were just cheap trinkets from a street stall. No matter how much she tried to clean them, they could never return to how they once were. And Willow finally understood, it was time to let go. The best way to make amends, to truly do right by George, was to never bother him again. They should part ways, each living their own separate lives. She didn't deserve happiness, but she hoped George could have it. Not with her, but with another woman. Willow numbly traced her fingers over the old necklaces, let out a quiet sigh, pressed a trembling hand over her aching heart, and gave George one final look. The wedding ceremony ended, and the banquet began. Hand in hand with Anna, I personally toasted every table of family and friends. The city's elite mingled and celebrated, raising their glasses and offering their blessings for a lifetime of happiness. Eventually, we reached a quiet corner, the very last table. It was Willow's. The security guards stepped forward immediately. Young Master Wang, Miss Su, please be careful. Should we just skip this table? They positioned themselves between us and the table, ready to intervene if Willow had another breakdown. I remained indifferent. It's fine. A guest is a guest. Let this be a farewell drink. With a casual wave, I walked toward Willow's seat, but when we arrived, there was no one there. The chair sat empty. The only thing left on the table was 2 old, rusted necklaces. I paused for a moment. Then, unexpectedly, I let out a light chuckle. I turned to Anna and said, "Let's go." Without a second glance, I took her hand and moved on to the next table, as if nothing had happened, as if I had never seen anything at all. One of the security guards hesitated, then cluelessly asked, "Young Master Wang, these necklaces?" Without even looking back, I replied, "Throw them away." Willow had let go, and now, so would I. That love, undeserving of my respect, should be discarded, just like those rusted trinkets. Later, in a quiet backstage hallway, Anna suddenly shoved me lightly, her voice laced with playful jealousy. That was your goddess's token of love. Are you really so willing to throw it away? I met her amused gaze, shrugged, and smiled easily. A token of love? My real token of love is right here. I lifted Anna's delicate hand high, our wedding rings shining side by side, silver bands, gleaming in the light. I had let go of a love that had never truly valued me, and in return, I had gained a love that would last a lifetime.